So with chapter 5 now out, there is a lot of chapters in Deltarune now to where we can actually do a video like this and have like a proper comparison tier list of all the Deltarune chapters. We're gonna rank them on a tier list, starting with chapter 1. So going back to chapter 1 of Deltarune, it's kind of hard to go back that far because if you think about it, that was almost 10 years ago since the original chapter 1 was released. You know, that was a very interesting, I don't mean to make the Gaster reference, but it was a very interesting time in the community because, you know, for years, you have to think about this, for 3 years, we haven't had any new Undertale content since the original game released. And what we had to go off of was just loose Gaster information to keep us satisfied. So when all of a sudden, randomly, the Undertale Twitter account just becomes completely Gasterfied, naturally, I think the community is about to lose their entire minds. That day was definitely interesting. Gaster came on Twitter, said return here in 24 hours. And then when 24 hours was up, he took us to deltarune.com. And on that website, it said you can't talk about the game for 24 hours. I definitely didn't play the first Deltarune chapter right away. I was around for when Gaster was taking over the Twitter because it was like kind of going viral. And eventually I did sit down and play through all of chapter 1 a couple months later, I think, because, you know, I wasn't doing Deltarune as my job back then. I was in school. Eventually I sat down and I played Deltarune chapter 1 on my Nintendo Switch. And I thought it was good. Why did I say that like Trump? I thought Deltarune chapter 1 gets a lot of hate these days because it gets compared to a lot of the future Deltarune chapters. Now, don't get me wrong, Deltarune chapter 1 has a lot of weaknesses in comparison to the future chapters, but I think that's because, number 1, Toby actually has a team to work on Deltarune now, and on number 2, I think Toby also learned a lot more about game development and game design philosophies and stuff. Not to say that Toby isn't a good game developer at that time, but, you know, everyone improves on their work the more they do it, right? That goes for me too when I make these YouTube videos. Looking back on chapter 1 though, there is a lot of things that this chapter does that a lot of people just do not give it credit for. And honestly, I think it deserves a lot more recognition. So Deltarune chapter 1 does a lot of things right with game design that I absolutely love. For starters, it throws you into this weird Gaster starter area, so you're immediately like confused. You have no idea what you're doing. Gaster on Twitter just told you to download this random file and was just like, hey, check this out. But immediately after that Gaster sequence, what I love the most is that it throws you into the light world and everything seems like Undertale. You get introduced to Kris, you see Toriel again for the first time in 3 years, and you open up the menu and it is the exact same menu as Undertale. The dialogue portraits are the same, the dialogue boxes are the same. The music is familiar because of the hopes and dreams motif that appears in the beginning of the game, and it throws you into a familiar environment. It makes you think that this is a proper Undertale sequel because when it does throw you into this environment, it throws you into familiar characters. You see Undyne, you see the variety of different monsters from Undertale that you already know. And when you get to the school, you see Alphys. It makes you give a sense of familiarity that this is in fact Undertale. So when it throws you into the dark world the first time, everyone's initial reaction was, oh, they're going to the underground, right? But no, you're thrown into the dark world and then all of your expectations get thrown out of whack. The menu changes and you get introduced to Susie as a character. And when you explore this world, you get thrown into a live combat. You don't get into turn-based battles immediately. It shows you your soul and it throws bullet patterns at you in the overworld. It makes you feel more confused, like what the hell is going on? But the decision that I love the most about this chapter is that when you hear the legend for the first time, Lancer shows up, it immediately just throws you into the battle. It doesn't give you any prior warning. It doesn't give you a tutorial. It doesn't ease you in. It just throws you right into the battle. I love that. That is such a good game design decision because again, prior to this, your expectations were set that this is just an Undertale sequel. You have the expectation that it's going to be exactly like Undertale. So when you get thrown into the Dark World and vice versa, get thrown into the battle with Lancer, your expectations weren't expecting a party-based battle system. So naturally, when you're thrown into this battle, you're like, what do I do? And you just click on random shit until the battle ends. You don't know about the warning system with Susie. You don't know why Susie acts on her own yet. It's meant to just throw you for a loop. So then Ralsei joins your party, and then eventually you do actually do the combat tutorial. I love how the tutorial is directly after throwing you into the Lancer battle. It is so good, and it is by far my favorite moments of this chapter. Everything executed in the beginning parts of this game right there is flawless. It is done perfectly. And those steps alone make me want to rank this chapter a lot higher than most people typically would. Now, for the negatives of this chapter, though, the first thing that comes to mind, the battle system seems a little bit unpolished at this point. There isn't an S action or an R action yet, and a lot of the enemies rely on Kris just acting and then telling Ralsei and Susie what to do. So a lot of the times when you don't need to act as Ralsei or Susie, you're just going to be defending with them. So that unpolish in chapter 1 with the battle system, it makes it seem like, okay, then why is there a party system in the first place? Like, the Undertale battle system was good, and this is an only feeling in chapter 1. Once we get into like chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5, the battle system is completely polished and there is no complaints with it. But chapter 1 specifically, when you don't need to act with Susie and Ralsei, the party, you're just gonna be defending the entire time, which just begs the question, like, you could have just had Kris do this solo. Another criticism for this chapter, the secret boss keys were very much just half-assed, and I think Toby admitted this himself, that the keys were just brought in last minute because they needed to meet a deadline for the chapter. The puzzle for one of the keys is just diamond, heart, club, spade, and you're supposed to just figure that out. I mean, people definitely figured it out, but it definitely seems half-assed. Another big criticism that I have for this chapter is the ending. Specifically, in one of the endings, Susie apparently just masters and picks up on Ralsei's sleep spell to put King to sleep. That doesn't make any logical sense. It's just briefly mentioned that Susie can use Ralsei's sleep magic, and it's just never brought up again past this point. Like, you go into chapter 2 and Susie just does not have this spell. Personally, I think this is used as a plot device. It feels like Toby wrote himself into a corner with that one and just needed, you know, something to get himself out of the corner, which, you know, it's not that big of a deal. But I think chapter 1, while it does set the basic formula of the future Deltarune chapters, and it does set up a lot of the plot going forward, it feels like chapter 1 specifically feels more like a proof of concept that, hey, this is Deltarune. I am presenting an idea to the audience, and if you all like it, then I will continue developing it. I think it would be awesome if Toby and his team would eventually go back to chapter 1 and fix up a lot of the issues with it and bring over stuff that was introduced in future chapters, like the recruit system, the lost system, will just make Deltarune feel a lot more rounded out. Where I would rank this chapter, though, it is by far, like, it's good. Do not get me wrong. Like, this chapter, it does a lot of things right. I give a lot of high praise to this chapter, but it also does a lot of like things that future chapters just handle better. So when you look back on chapter 1, it's no wonder a lot of people these days don't really talk about it, because future chapters, they just do it better, you know? But I don't think it's necessarily bad. I just think there's nitpicks with it, you know? Personally, I think I'm gonna put it in B. I'm gonna put it in B because I don't think it necessarily is the best thing in the world. I think all of Toby's other works are just better than chapter 1 of Deltarune. That includes Undertale and chapters 2 through 5. But that doesn't mean chapter 1 is bad. So I don't think I can ever give it a ranking lower than a C and a D. This is actually what I was looking forward to the most out of this video, is talking about chapter 2. Chapter 1 had the issue of always being in Undertale shadow. Chapter 2, when it came out, it really made Deltarune just Deltarune. It no longer felt like it was stuck in Undertale shadow. It felt like a full proper game. It felt like Deltarune was no longer just a proof of concept from chapter 1. It felt like, hey, this game actually is going to be made. It's Deltarune. It's not part, it is part of the Undertale series, but it's just not the quote sequel to Undertale. You know what I mean? And I think the biggest example of this is when you finally get to the computer lab and you get past the first wire fight and you go down, and then the beat drops for Cyberworld and you see that amazing background. Oh my God, that's when you feel it. That's when you know, oh my God, chapter 2, and by extension, the rest of the chapters, they are far more quality than chapter 1. In terms of improvement, they improve on the battle system in chapter 2 a lot. They give Susie and Ralsei axe, and while I think Toby was hesitant on giving them axe in chapter 1 because acting is supposed to be Kris's unique ability, as Ralsei says in the tutorial fight for the S action and R action. The S action and R action was just a great feature to add in terms of game design. It polishes out the battle system phenomenally. And in addition to this, it introduces the recruit system, the loss system, and it actually gives a reason for you all to just spare enemies. It gives reason to spare them instead of fighting them. Whereas in chapter 1, it didn't really matter. In fact, you could have skipped every enemy in chapter 1, almost every enemy, if you wanted to. It did not matter. In chapter 2, there's the recruit system. And in addition to this, the secret boss is a lot more refined than chapter 1. It's not half-assed. And on top of this, it adds the weird route to the game. It introduces the weird route. Without chapter 2, we wouldn't have the weird route. Everything about chapter 2, it just makes it feel like Deltarune is its own game. It's no longer just a proof of concept. It's no longer living in Undertale's shadow. Everything about chapter 2 is executed just flawlessly. I don't really have any amount of criticism to chapter 2. In my opinion, I gotta give it to S. It's just done well. All right, so going on to chapter 3 and 4, these were both released simultaneously. So naturally, I think these two chapters got compared to each other the most out of any other chapter. So for chapter 3, this chapter is a very weird one. So the weird route kind of stops in chapter 3. It doesn't stop entirely. There's a couple minor dialogue changes throughout chapter 3. I don't think this chapter is bad. Far from it. It does a lot of things that I love, but this chapter relies on the Zelda gameplay sections, and that's kind of its old gimmick. Now, initially, when this chapter came out and I played through the Zelda sections, I didn't really like it that much, mainly because I don't really care about NES Zelda gameplay. I think Tenna is really fun and cool. The fact that he is in a completely different art style in comparison to everything else in the game, I think that is really funny. And I think the ending for chapter 3 is also really well done and executed. I don't think I really have that big of a problem with the Roaring Knight being the secret boss for chapter 3. There's a lot of character development between Susie and Ralsei. Ralsei especially having, doing stuff on his own without Kris guiding him. Mini games that are at the end of each board are really fun outside of I guess the cooking mini game, because I suck at the cooking mini game and I don't like the cooking mini game. But the rhythm mini game is really cool, and I like how in future chapters it adds more songs. This chapter, it's solid. I don't particularly have really much to say about it. What I do like about this chapter though, when you do the Shadow Mantle puzzles and you do Sword Route and fight Eram, it is meant to give you hints on the weird root's existence, like an in-game hint that the weird root exists. Now, obviously, if you're in the Deltarune community, we have already discovered the weird root and we already know how to activate the weird root. But with chapter 3 doing sword root and stuff, it makes the game feel a lot more rounded out. To be honest, doing the chapter 2 weird root is kind of a little bit hyper specific. The average casual player isn't going to find it on their own. But if they end up doing the sword route in chapter 3 and go off and find that secret, they might be able to piece together that, hey, the weird route exists in chapter 2. What if I just go dick around in chapter 2 and try to find out what it means, you know? So I think that is a really, really good game design decision. And I'm very happy that the weird route isn't just like, you know, this very secret route that only the community knows about and the game just never gives you any hints that it even exists. So I think chapter 3 does a lot of things right. Is it better than chapter 2 though? You gotta take this into consideration too. Chapter 2 made Deltarune what it is today. I don't think chapter 3 is bad. I think it is solid. I don't think it really necessarily does anything wrong. If you're not a big fan of the Zelda gameplay, you know, you might rank this chapter lower. It's definitely not below chapter 1. And I think I'm gonna put it in A rank. I'll give it A rank. Okay, Deltarune chapter 4. This chapter is a lot of people's favorite chapters, and I can very much see why. This chapter primarily focuses on the lore of the game. It gives more information on the prophecy, and the character development between the fun gang is definitely like off the charts. I can see why it's a lot of people's favorites, and I definitely agree that this is up there with my favorite chapters. It's definitely up there with 2. You know, it brought Gerson back, gave a lot of lore about the Dark World and how the Dark Fountains function. It introduces climbing as a mechanic, and while I personally don't like the climbing mechanic, with the addition of climbing, it does give the game a lot more movement options. Another thing that I don't like about chapter 4 is the dark sections, but I understand why they exist. And it's important that they do exist because the theming of chapter 4 is just, hey, it's darker than dark, right? The secret boss for chapter 4, I think it is a nice refresher. It's about the same difficulty as Jevil, I'd say, probably a little bit easier actually. I don't like the diagonal parts of addition to the green soul. I really do like the light inside your soul mechanic. When you fight the Titan spawns for the first time and you get introduced to gathering the TP and using your light to like shrink the bullet patterns, I think that is a really, really cool mechanic. I love that mechanic and I think it is really, really fun. I think Jackenstein is like a really cute character. I love him. And in chapter 4 as well, the weird route actually continues in this chapter, and it is by far really insane. My favorite part about this chapter though specifically is the light world sections, which feels kind of weird to say because a lot of this game does just take place in the dark world, and chapter 4 is no exception to this. But I think the light world section in chapter 4 specifically is like really, really well done. You know, you go to QC's diner and you sit down with Susie, completely optional by the way, but you can do that, and it just shows a lot of character development and growth between Kris and Susie. I mean, it's just kind of a vibe, you know, in this chapter, just going around the light world, interacting with different stuff. And then when you get to Noelle's house, you get introduced to Des in a casual sense. A lot of the fans do know about Des, but for the casual players, this is like the first introduction of like Des being a very important plot point. Navigating the air vents with the soul and finding like little secrets, like with Asgore and stuff, going down into the basement of Noelle's house, shutting off the power, doing the little mini game with Kris trying to attack the soul. That is all really, really fun. I really love that. I really like this, the slice of life feeling of the light world in chapter 4. Susie making her own dark fountain, that is really cool. Her snapping at Ralsei in that moment, and you know, the fucked up Gerson statue thing that you have to fight and having to rely on sound cues. That is a really cool gimmick. This chapter does a lot of things well. For that, I think I gotta give this S rank. It's not my favorite, and I still think I would prefer to play chapter 2 over chapter 4. And I think I gotta make this a little bit more fair too. When chapter 4 did release, they left in a bunch of debug stuff in the game, which makes me wonder how this happened. Like there was literally a key that you could press in chapter 4 specifically, where if you press this key, you would just be soft locked. Now, a lot of people aren't going to figure this out because it was in a specific room and it was a specific key. And why would you ever press this key in normal gameplay? It was factually still there in the first release of the game that if you press this key, you would soft lock yourself from getting to the end of the chapter. Now, eventually they did go back and fix it, so props to them. So I can't really weigh it down too much. But the fact that that was allowed to slip through the cracks in the first place, what happened to testing with this chapter? Among its problems of its very prevalent weird bugs that exist, I think it still deserves S rank. I think it is a very good chapter. And now we have chapter 5. So going off of chapter 4, chapter 5 had a lot to live up to. Chapter 4 is a lot of people's favorite chapters, and as I said before, I can see why. So as such, people had really, really high expectations for chapter 5. I think that made the community's opinion on chapter 5 like go down a little bit because they were expecting like way too much out of this chapter. But for what it is, I think it's pretty good. The platforming section specifically, that is my favorite gimmick ever introduced into Deltarune. I like that more than the Zelda gameplay sections in chapter 3 and the climbing in chapter 4. Chapter 5's platforming is really fun. It is very fluent. It is very clear they took a lot of time programming in the platforming sections in chapter 5. It is really, really well done. I really like the 7 flowers. I think it's really cute, all the Omega Flowery references. And especially at the end, Omega Flowery. There isn't as many weird bugs in this chapter compared to chapter 4. This chapter defied a lot of people's expectations on what it was going to be. And I love that for it because people were expecting like an evil fucked up group of flowers or something, or as like the secret boss or something like that. But no, we got generic anime guy that is kind of self-aware. It's a very good counterpart to Flowey from Undertale. I really like Ralsei's character development in this chapter as well, with him getting angry at Flowery, because Ralsei getting mad and angry and pissed only really works if the character development of chapter 4 actually happened. Unironically, the weird route is definitely at its peak in chapter 5, going into the lake and just drowning. It's really well done. And then with the orange soul mode getting introduced in the flowery fight as well, how it starts you off with the yellow soul, so it gives you a sense of familiarity that, oh hey, this is going to be just like the Spamton fight. This is going to be the yellow soul. We're familiar with the yellow soul. It's just how it was in Undertale. And then it just transitions into the orange soul just out of nowhere. And it's like, what the fuck? At the end of the pink fight, you can choose like your own like equipment that the flowers give you, and the equipment is based off of the equipment from Undertale. It's really well done. It feels like if Toby Fox sat down and was like, hey, what if I just make my own Undertale fan game? And you know what? I think it reaches that goal pretty well. Is it better than 2 and 4 though? Just because of the context surrounding chapter 2 and how much it did for Deltarune, and chapter 4 by extension. I could have recency bias and rank it extremely high when in reality it's like an A tier or something, you know what I mean? But I think looking at it objectively, I don't think it's that bad. I think I gotta put it in S tier. But anyway, thank you all for watching. YouTube thinks you like this video, so why not see if they're right? Goodbye.